Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a pretty wild idea. What if our thoughts could create actual invisible fields that physically shape our world? We're going to connect a pretty controversial scientific theory with some ancient wisdom to see how that might actually work.
I mean, that is a huge question, right? The sources we're digging into today basically say yes, they can. And the way it works, they suggest, involves a kind of cosmic memory. It's a fascinating concept.
So let's start with this scientific hypothesis. It's definitely provocative, but it's also really compelling. It's this idea that the universe itself has some kind of memory.
Okay, so biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls this morphic resonance. His hypothesis is that nature has a collective memory. He argues that once something happens, say a crystal forms in a lab, it creates this invisible morphic field. That field then makes it easier for the same thing to happen again, anywhere else in the world. It's like nature learns.
And this is where it gets really controversial. Sheldrake will point to things like new chemicals suddenly crystallizing more easily all over the globe after the first time. But, mainstream science is pretty skeptical. They argue there are much simpler explanations, and that the theory itself is, at its core, impossible to truly test.
Okay, so just hold on to that idea of a universal memory. Now, we're going to bring in a second concept from a totally different source. The idea that our own minds are like these powerful broadcasting stations, sending out their own energetic fields.
This source argues that our thoughts are not just stuck in our heads, they actually generate electromagnetic fields. And when you're stuck in prolonged negativity, like fear or stress, it's said to create a destructive field. A field with a physical effect on our bodies that's as real as infrared or even microwave radiation.
So you basically have these two opposite poles. On one side, you've got this destructive field, born from fear and anxiety. But on the other side, you've got what's called a heavenly field. And this one is generated by faith, hope, and positivity. The source compares its energy to calming, healing light, like purples, blues, and greens.
And the big takeaway here is that we're constantly taking in this data, from our own thoughts and from the world around us. And according to this viewpoint, that input doesn't just, affect our mood, it is actively creating our reality.
All right, so now let's see how these ideas of resonance and thought fields get woven together through a really powerful case study from an ancient text, the story of the prophet Joseph.
The story of Joseph is it's a masterclass in dealing with adversity. I mean, think about it. From the ultimate betrayal by his brothers, to being sold into slavery, to spending years locked away in prison for a crime he didn't commit, his situation could not get much worse. And yet, his story ends with him in a position of incredible power.
So through all of these insane trials, the big question becomes, how did he do it? How did he maintain such a positive internal state? How did he keep broadcasting what our sources would call that heavenly field, when everything on the outside was just so terrible?
According to the narrative, his anchor wasn't his external situation at all, but his internal one. He says his resilience, his happiness even, didn't come from a hope of escape, but from his constant, unwavering connection with the divine, a source of strength that nobody could take away from him.
But the story also includes this really crucial test. In a moment of weakness, just being human, Joseph asks a fellow prisoner for help. He briefly puts his hope in a person, not in the divine. And the consequence, reported in the story? 7 more years in prison. It's a pretty stark lesson about where to place your trust. And this really speaks to a larger theme in the text, that help often shows up right at the absolute breaking point. It's only when all worldly hope seems to be gone and that reliance on the divine is all that you have left that deliverance finally comes. So in our final section, we're going to connect all these threads, morphic fields, thought energy, and Joseph's story, to reveal the central thesis that's presented in this really unique synthesis of ideas.
So here's how all the pieces are meant to fit together. First, you've got the idea that our thoughts create real, physical, energetic fields. Second, you have Sheldrake's theory that this universal memory, or morphic field, exists. Now the synthesis suggests these two things connect. Our personal thought fields are constantly interacting with this big, universal one. And the story of Joseph, well, that's presented as the ultimate masterclass, a real-world example of someone who mastered this very interaction to overcome impossible odds.
And the final piece of the puzzle, according to the synthesis, is this. The Quran is presented as the instruction manual. It's described as a divine blueprint, spelling out how to consciously and correctly engage with these universal energies to create the best possible outcome.
And all of this brings us to one final, really provocative thought that turns the lens away from ancient stories and complex theories and points it directly back at us.
So, at the end of the day, whether you see all this as fringe science, a powerful spiritual metaphor, or just a really cool story about resilience, the core idea is potent. It suggests your thoughts right now, in this very moment, are creating a field. So the only question left is the one right there on your screen.